But they added in at the end, just as a caveat, well, what they want is really not that complicated. Okay, then don't make a complicated article making a new definition about a word called mankeeping.
Hi, and welcome to, or back to, my channel where I offer my thoughts and opinions about whatever catches my attention. I'm Kit, and for the first video of 2026, I thought we would start off easy and talk about mankeeping, or more accurately, how upset Reagan Conrad, the current host of the Daily Wire's The Comment Section, gets at the idea that women wouldn't be happy to keep men, and how she completely misunderstands what mankeeping is. Hint, it's not normal relationship things. Anyway, congratulations to Reagan on her pregnancy. Let me know in the comments if you think this will be her excuse to step away from the channel, which I have to admit hasn't been the same since Brett Cooper left. So with that, I'm thinking yes. Also, let me know if you think they'll retire the comment section at that point, or if they'll hire a new host. I'm leaning toward the former because they really should have learned their lesson by now. But anyway, Reagan opens her video claiming the media has a new phrase to deepen the gender divide, and that new phrase apparently is called mankeeping. But she does seem to be quite upset about this.
That particular post obviously went crazy viral, and so readers added context on X. And it says, mankeeping is essentially a rewording of caring for a man in a relationship, with connotations that it is often a burden and unequal. This is more advocacy than neutral reporting, with a clear ideological slant that prioritizes feminist equity over balanced causation, which is just a great little own by the community notes there. I saw that and I was just immediately appalled, because in a relationship, it just defines all those things. Interpreting moods, helping to manage stress, holding his hand through feelings he won't share with anyone else. That's what a girlfriend or a wife does. That's what a relationship is for. But then they're trying to phrase it like, oh, well, if it's unpaid and unacknowledged. What? Of course it's unpaid. It's a relationship.
I love it when people take something and then promptly turn it into something it's not. The article isn't saying that men and women should never do anything for each other, or that if they do, they should be paid. It's simply pointing out the imbalance in heterosexual relationships and theorizing that could be a reason women stepped back from dating. There's no reason to take offense. Unless, of course, that's how you do your relationships and you feel called out. But anyway.
We live in such a narcissistic culture that they can even rephrase it as, well, you're carrying someone's emotional burden unpaid? Ugh, what?
But you guys are getting paid?
Hello, that is a normal, healthy relationship.
Right. And that's not what they're talking about. It's really kind of frustrating to see someone deliberately misunderstand something that's really not that difficult to comprehend. Though, on the bright side, I don't think Reagan is pretending. I think she really is just a shallow thinker.
Okay, so when you open the article, this is how it starts. Researchers at Stanford have finally given a name to something many women have been dealing with for years. It's called mankeeping, and it's helping explain why so many women are stepping away from dating altogether. This is what the researchers at Stanford are spending their time doing. Naming something that has been around since creation itself, since man and woman came together and were in relationship.
So mankeeping is simultaneously not a thing, but also something that's existed since the beginning of time. Alrighty.
I mean, oh my gosh. I want to laugh, but I'm annoyed, so I'm not laughing. Mankeeping describes the emotional labor women end up doing in heterosexual relationships. It goes beyond remembering birthdays or coordinating social plans. It means being your partner's one-man support system, managing his stress, interpreting his moods, holding his hand. Again, this is just a relationship.
Perhaps if Reagan kept reading, she would understand what the researchers are talking about. But nah, let's bring in some internalized misogyny instead.
And the fact, too, that it starts off being like, well, men do this. And women don't? We don't have moods that go like this, and the man has to keep up with... What? I laughed out loud when I first saw that, because it's like, well, what would you call woman keeping? Are researchers at Stanford researching that phenomenon? The fact that our hormones are different every single day of the month?
Oh my God.
I mean, if we're talking about being irregular, it's us. Like, we are more like that. But no, it's the men.
I keep hearing about how women just go through these hormonal seesaws every month, but maybe it's actually not as dramatic as these folks like to pretend, or I and every woman I know and have known are just remarkably well regulated. Regardless, this is not about women are perfect, men are bad. It's about a noted observation in heterosexual relationship dynamics, and I have so many doubts that a conservative influencer has never seen this. Really, Reagan? You don't reach out to the women in the family, even when you're actually related to the man, for things like birthdays and holidays? You've never seen the women cook and clean up after a family meal while the men hang out? I have so many doubts. But hey, if that's true, that's wonderful. And surprisingly progressive for a Daily Wire employee.
Now, I'm not saying that all men are perfect, but I'm saying on average, there is a normalcy about this. that is good and right and, again, normal. And I would argue that it's more men that actually hold that emotional stress and those burdens for their women.
Or maybe Reagan's circle isn't progressive and she just hasn't noticed how they do things because to her it's normal and natural to have women doing everything while the men relax. Anyway.
Also funny because weren't these same women and these feminists and whomever is writing this article, weren't they the ones being like, you know what? No, men need to be more emotional. They need to show their emotions more. They need to be more open and vulnerable and delicate and dainty. Okay. So it seems, at least according to these researchers, they got that to some degree, but now they don't want it. No, because that means that they have to now carry that burden. Guess what, ladies? You can't have it both ways. Maybe we should just stick with how men biologically want to be. What is just their nature? They want to be closed off, but they want to be stoic. They want to hold the burdens of the emotional then let them.
There's a big difference between the give and take of a relationship and one person dumping everything on the other and expecting them to deal with it. One is natural, and the other should involve a therapist. As for how it's natural for men to be stoic, we already know that no, it's not natural for men to internalize their emotions, and it's also not healthy for them to do so. It does not then follow it's healthier to dump everything on a romantic partner, and it's so disingenuous to pretend that that is what this is about. Oh, you don't want your partner to treat you like an unpaid therapist? Well, I thought women wanted men to open up more. Honestly, does that really have to be explained? The irony is not lost on me though. Instead of trying to find healthy ways to communicate with a partner, men will instead whinge about how mankeeping paints them in a bad light. Or a woman like Reagan will do the whinging for them. Speaking of which.
The root of this issue is tied to what experts are calling the male loneliness epidemic. Experts are we've never heard of this. Guess what? It's a big thing. If you're paying attention to men's needs at large, you would know that this is a problem. Oh my gosh, it's so annoying. As more men report having fewer close friendships, romantic partners are expected to pick up the slack. Instead of processing with friends, many men offload onto the women they're dating. She becomes his entire emotional infrastructure. As I always love to put as a disclaimer for a lot of women do not feel this way. I cannot name a single woman in my life who feels this way. But as always, the media tries to perpetuate a certain ideology, a certain belief, and then normalize it. We're gonna come up with this word called mankeeping, and then we're gonna put it into the mainstream and everyone's gonna use it. No.
I hate to be the one to tell Reagan this, but mankeeping isn't new. It's just another offshoot of emotional labor, which was first coined in 1983 in relation to the workplace, but has since expanded. And I'm honestly not sure what is supposed to differentiate mankeeping from emotional labor, so you know what? Let's read the Stanford article. The Structural Burden of Men's Declining Social Networks by Mariana Y. Zhang, Graduate Dissertation Fellow. Quote, someone who wraps their arms around you. It's like forming a supportive bond. You can listen to each other, you can vent to each other, says Vivek, a 35-year-old South Asian American man when asked what friendship is. Is there someone you have that with? Asks the interviewer. I definitely have a lot of acquaintances. Not as many friends now, he admits. Many men have stories like Vivek's. Based on data published by the Survey Center on American Life and other census representative data, men's social network decline, that is, a decrease in their close social connections, is happening at a faster rate than women's throughout many globalized economies. Such increasing patterns of gendered isolation may have consequences for men's social and emotional development, but also for the autonomy of women, according to a recent talk by postdoctoral fellow Angelica Puzio Ferrara. Ferrara presented these ideas as part of her forthcoming book project, Men Without Men. In the US, about 1 in 5 men claim they have no close friends, Ferrara states, mentioning data from various large survey research institutes around the country. In comparison to women's social networks, men's social networks in the US and UK tend to be thinner in depth, less frequent in emotional disclosure, and more rarely relied on for support. Ferrara continued by summarizing the developmental and social science of close relationships, which identifies friendships as the arena where critical social and emotional skill sets, such as listening, empathy, and reciprocity, are nurtured. In interviews with adult men in the US and UK, Ferrara discovered that many men struggle with forming and maintaining deep, meaningful friendships, which causes some men to miss out on opportunities essential for sustaining their emotional development. Her work suggests that men's struggles are rooted in restrictive ideas about manhood. For example, Blake, a 34-year-old white British man, described the difficulty that certain types of masculinity pose for forming close relationships. We are all trying to be alpha men, so to be vulnerable and be close to people is hard, said Blake. Because of the world we're in, I feel emotionally repressed and stunted. I can't even get in touch truly with my own feelings. Ferrara, a developmental psychologist by training, stresses the wider developmental scope of male social networks, contending that emotionally thin relationships among men are not often the case among boys. Drawing on interviews with adolescent boys from her doctoral work, which have been described elsewhere in the work of psychologist Niobe Way, Ferrara points out that many adolescent boys form meaningful friendships with other boys, but such friendships tend to fade as boys approach the onset of manhood. Summarizing her interviews, Ferrara says that patriarchal masculinity impedes emotionally intimate bonds between men, As a result, men do not flex these competencies as much as women. As a result, men and women develop a skill differential in social and emotional competencies, which, as Ferrara pointed out, could have consequences at the individual and structural level. Where do men who struggle with deep same-gender bonds turn to fulfill their needs for intimacy and support? According to Ferrara, many men turn to women, including girlfriends and female friends. Alternatively, some men turn to readily available but thin forms of bonding in places that consolidate male power and openly reproduce misogyny, such as the various online communities that constitute what has been termed the manosphere. As for the various ways that women help men compensate for stunted social networks, Ferrara labels such forms of labor as mankeeping, by analogy to sociologist Carolyn Rosenthal's theory of kinkeeping, or the labor that women do to maintain bonds within their families. This is a labor that women take on to shore up losses in men's social networks and reduce the burden of isolation on families, on the heterosexual bond itself, and on men, says Ferrara, who plans to interview more women for her project. The barriers that men are facing in their relationships have the potential to expand women's labor on men's behalf, she argued. Although men's loneliness hurts men, their struggles can become a burden for women as well. Ferrara argues that men's loneliness, a problem thought to be individual, is in fact structural. She identifies mankeeping as an important and overlooked component of patriarchal social structures, in which case, recognizing and naming this form of gendered labor may be important for making women's emotional work more visible and hopefully more equal. End quote. So, as I understand it, men are suffering from the loss of male friendships, and so they're relying on women more to fulfill those social and emotional needs. I'm not entirely sure we need a new term for that. It seems like another aspect of emotional labor, but I'm really curious if Reagan read the article, because she seems offended on men's behalf here, but it's not healthy for men to be without male friends. It's not healthy for men to close themselves off emotionally. It's also not healthy for women to be men's emotional dumping grounds. We know this. I would say I don't understand why Reagan is acting this way, but that would be a lie. Daily Wire pays her to act this way. They pay her to act as though men are being attacked when this is not bad. Obviously, it's neither good nor okay to treat female friends or partners as unpaid therapists. But that does not mean men are doing so maliciously or that there's no other option, just shut up or be alone forever. An important step is being aware of an issue so steps can be taken to remedy it. Or just pretend that everything is fine and this is just feminists being mean to men.
They do finally acknowledge it here. Some men have started opening up more, which is good. Okay, but too often, that openness lands in the lap of the person they're sleeping with instead of a therapist or friend. You don't say that vulnerability that women so desperately want would then land in the laps of the woman in their life. Duh! They're not going to open up to their BFF, they're going to open up to their girlfriend.
My first thought is, why? Of course you want to open up to your girlfriend, but why not also to your best friend? Granted, I suspect Reagan believes that men are naturally stoic and thus save their vulnerability for women, but still, are we supposed to believe that men's friendships are inherently shallow? I do think Reagan honestly believes she's standing up for men here, and I'm sure, Matt Walsh would agree, but she's really not. I am enjoying her fake indignation, though.
What women want isn't complicated. They want shared effort, mutual support, emotional responsibility that doesn't get passed off like a group project. Of course they want that. But that's not what this article is about. They are labeling men of this thing called mankeeping and then harping on it.
Just because you're a man doesn't mean you're guilty of needing to be man-kept. And an article talking about what's it about isn't harping on it. My goodness.
Of course we all want shared effort and mutual support. That's not what this toxic freaking article is talking about, though.
My what here encompasses so many things. But first, let's read this toxic freaking article. Mankeeping is Why Women Are Done with Dating by Ashley Feike? Researchers at Stanford have finally given a name to something many women have been dealing with for years. It's called mankeeping, and it's helping explain why so many women are stepping away from dating altogether. Mankeeping describes the emotional labor women end up doing in heterosexual relationships. It goes beyond remembering birthdays or coordinating social plans. It means being your partner's one-man support system, managing his stress, interpreting his moods, holding his hand through feelings he won't share with anyone else. All of it unpaid, unacknowledged, and often unreciprocated. The root of the issue is tied to what experts are calling the male loneliness epidemic. As more men report having fewer close friendships, romantic partners are expected to pick up the slack. Instead of processing with friends, many men offload everything onto the woman they're dating. She becomes his entire emotional infrastructure. Plenty of women are no longer interested in that dynamic. According to Pew Research, only 38% of single women in the US are currently looking for a relationship. Among single men, that number jumps to 61%. The gap says a lot. Women aren't opting out of love. They're opting out of being someone's therapist with benefits. The Guardian calls mankeeping a modern extension of emotional labor, one that turns a partner into a life coach. This isn't about avoiding vulnerability. It's about refusing to carry someone else's emotional weight while getting little to nothing in return, and there's nothing wrong with feeling that way. Some men have started opening up more, which is good. But too often, that openness lands in the lap of the person they're sleeping with instead of a friend or a therapist. Vulnerability without boundaries can feel more like a burden than a breakthrough. What women want isn't complicated. They want shared effort, mutual support, emotional responsibility that doesn't get passed off like a group project. When that doesn't happen, they're choosing solitude over stress, and they're not apologizing for it. Some women are called bitter for stepping back from dating. Others are labeled cold. What they're really doing is protecting their capacity. The choice to stay single rarely comes from defeat. It comes from knowing exactly how much energy they have left to give. Until that imbalance shifts, more women will keep walking away. Being alone is easier than managing someone else's emotional life. End quote. That's pretty much what I expected and what Reagan is ignoring. Men have fewer friends now, so everything that might once have been shared among friends is instead shared only with one person. And not only is that a lot to put on one person, it's also unfair. In general, but as Reagan notes, yes, we all want love and support. But that's not what women are getting. If this was an even exchange, we wouldn't be talking about mankeeping. And yes, relationships have ups and downs. Yes, sometimes one partner will take more than they give, but this is about a pattern that women give and men don't reciprocate. Quote, a study of 100 young heterosexual couples conducted by communications scholar Tamara Afifi found that even though female participants didn't have higher standards for relationships than men did, including when it comes to desired levels of effective accessibility, they more frequently felt that these standards were not being met, even if they were shared with their partner. However, the same study also found that both women and men expect women to be aware of a relationship's needs and to have developed a set of skills to manage any problems that arise in the relationship. In other words, we all believe it's a woman's job to carry out all the emotional and hermeneutic labor necessary for a thriving relationship. This is also evident in studies examining couples seeking relationship counseling and who initiates it. Surprise, surprise, it's usually women. Also, and unsurprisingly, same-sex couples seek relationship counseling far more often than heterosexual couples. I now know and have written extensively about men's failures to provide care for the home and their children within heterosexual households. For a man and a woman who have children together, he will do less than half of the child-rearing and domestic labor than she does, a figure which hasn't budged in 25 years. Even when they both work full-time. There is one situation where their household labor will begin to approach parity, when she works full-time and he is unemployed. Even then, the operative word is approach. She will still do more on average. And some studies have even suggested that when women become higher earners, they are expected to compensate for their increased socioeconomic status by doing more care labor by their male partners. End quote. Kate Mann also did an article about mankeeping, which I'll link below along with the ones I've quoted in this video, which also link their sources, which I know we all like here. Anyway, let's finish up with Reagan.
But they added in at the end, just as a caveat, well, what they want is really not that complicated. Okay, then don't make a complicated article making a new definition about a word called mankeeping. It's garbage journalism, and it makes me mad. Honestly, I don't even want to define that as journalism, but here we are.
I can tell it makes her mad, but it's not complicated. And if Reagan finds it so, maybe she's not the right person to be talking about it. And if she finds it complicated, how does it make her so mad? I don't think she's mad at herself for not being able to understand.
If being loved and cared for is going to be rebranded as mankeeping, I see why men would be opting out of dating much higher than women. Again, let's talk about that.
Talk about what? Men opting out of dating? If Reagan wants to, she can, but according to the study linked in the Vice article, 38% of single women in the US are looking for a relationship compared to 61% of men. So anyway, Reagan says we'll never see articles about woman keeping, because that's not a thing, though Reagan pretends otherwise, and concludes,
and what I really want to stress here is how important what the media writes and talks about does affect the way that the genders view each other. I mean, we see it time and time again. We saw it for the last couple decades, and look where we're at. I mean, heck, just last week, it was, well, boyfriends are embarrassing. And this week, it's caring for your significant other's emotional well-being is actually man-keeping? Really? I mean, it's great that we have another term for feminist scholars to glom onto and complain about. But the real question here that I have after reading this article is why don't any of these so-called journalists spend their time researching the actual gender divide that's happening? Like looking into the fact that so many men and women are opting out of dating altogether. Yes, it is a huge conversation, but it's one that we should start having. And it's one that these researchers, who their whole job is to simply research, should spend a lot more time focusing on. They could finally be ones working to fix the divide rather than making it worse.
There is something truly poetic in ordering people to research what you think is important and then whinging because you don't like the conclusions when they do. And honestly, Reagan is no friend to anyone in this. With her, how dare you say men do this thing? Women are actually the problem with our daily hormone levels, right guys? You all have so much to deal with, let me tell you. She's not helping men, she's not helping anyone. She's telling men everything is fine on their end. If anything exists, it's woman keeping. But that's not going to make men less lonely, that's not going to make women want to get into relationships. Unfortunately, nothing is going to change unless people put in the work to change it. But hey, let's address those men who keep thinking they know what women really want. If you want to protect, help protect our peace. If you want to provide mutual support. The key word here is mutual. You don't have to turn into a doormat, you don't have to suffer in silence, but you do have to do something. And this is beneficial for men as well. We already know the traditional archetype of masculinity is not healthy and in fact is actually harmful. And anyone who actually cares about men shouldn't be advocating for its continuation. And on that note, for anyone questioning men's place in patriarchy, I recommend The Will to Change by Bell Hooks. And that's it for this video. My socials and Patreon are linked below along with sources and resources. I would like to thank everyone for watching through to the end, and of course, I would like to give extra thanks to my patrons. Have a wonderful day, reach out to a friend, and I'll see you in the next one.